I still remember the exact moment I realized my quiet little cul-de-sac wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a battlefield, and somehow I'd parked my life right on the front line because one minute I was standing in my backyard at 7 a.m., tossing a tug toy for Shadow, Torque, and Bear, three of the best K9s I've handled in 12 years working federal contracts. And the next minute, there was a woman in a pressed blazer and designer flats, literally climbing over my back wall like she was breaching a compound she owned on paper. I'm Logan Mercer, K9 handler, former military, now working under federal contracts on security and scent detection projects. My backyard in Cedar Ridge Park is not some casual dog run. It's a fully outfitted training ground with proper barriers, rubber footing, regulation equipment, and the permits to back it up. And yet there she was, this stranger dropping down into my space with a sound meter in one hand, a little GoPro in the other, and that specific tight smile you only ever see on people who think rules are a sword they get to swing, not a shield everyone shares. I'm Victoria Kane, president of the Cedar Ridge Park HOA, she announced like I should salute, barely glancing at the three German shepherds frozen in perfect hold position on my command. And I'm here to verify multiple noise and safety violations. These animals are not suitable for a residential community. They will need to be removed. I remember blinking a couple times the way you do when someone says something so insane your brain needs a reboot. Then I took a breath, kept my voice calm, and did what 12 years of working inside government systems had trained me to do. I asked for clarification, jurisdiction, documentation, all the boring things that make bullies nervous. I told her, "Ma'am, you are trespassing on private property. My dogs are federally certified working K9s. I have written authorization from the county and my contracts, and if you'd like to discuss anything further, we can do it by email." She didn't want email, though. She wanted dominance. She wanted to plant a flag. And when she realized I wasn't going to start stuttering apologies and offering to get rid of my dogs because a woman with a clipboard told me to, her tone shifted hard. She raised that little decibel meter towards Shadow's bark like she'd caught a felony on tape, snapped a few dramatic photos, and said, "Expect formal violation notices. Mr. Mercer, this community has standards, and I intend to enforce them." At first, I honestly thought it was just an overzealous HOA president who needed a hobby that didn't involve other people's fences. I emailed her copies of my permits, my contract language, the county sign-off on my training facility layout, everything. I told her I was open to reasonable compromise on training hours. I offered to do soundproofing upgrades at my own expense, because I've learned the hard way you solve more problems with patience than with posturing. But when the first 4 violation letters arrived, each one more aggressive than the last, and a $2,000 compliance fine got slapped on my account without a single board hearing, I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a legal war she'd been fighting for years, and I was just the newest target. I call an old buddy of mine from my Army intel days, guy now working investigations in another state, and he didn't even let me finish the story before he cut in, "Document everything, Logan." And I mean everything, dates, photos, audio, who said what, when they stepped on your property. Don't assume logic will fix this. People like that use process as a weapon, not a path to fairness. So I did what he said. I turned my house into a quiet little forward operating base, cameras on the corners, doorbell recording, logs of every letter, every conversation, every time a Cedar Ridge Park HOA vehicle slowed in front of my driveway. And once the footage started stacking up, the story stopped being annoying and started being ugly. Because here's what the cameras showed. They showed Victoria's own Lexus parked overnight in a fire lane. She'd written a violation for 3 weeks earlier when it belonged to some single mom down the street. They caught her stringing laundry on a balcony in direct violation of the aesthetic rules she'd used to fine another family $500 for having a drying rack in their yard. They caught an entire line of weeds snaking across the side of her house, untouched, while she sent landscaping citations to an older couple on the corner who couldn't afford a full lawn service. And the real kicker was audio, a little bit of overheard HOA gossip drifting across a patio. Her laughing with another board member, saying, "Honestly, the fine money practically funds my lifestyle. It's easier than selling another house." The more I watched, the more I realized this wasn't just about my dogs making noise at 5 a.m. This was about a woman who'd never been told no in a way that stuck. using the HOA like her personal ATM and enforcement squad, and a community so scared of being the next name on a letterhead that they smiled tight smiles at me in a grocery store, then crossed the aisle before conversation could turn into solidarity. So when the $2,000 fine turned into a $10,000 lien threat, when the violations suddenly included harboring dangerous animals and operating an unlicensed commercial training facility, when I got a letter on crisp HOA stationery calmly explaining that ongoing noncompliance could result in foreclosure action, I felt that same old adrenaline I'd felt overseas. That cold clarity that tells you this isn't going to de-escalate on its own. Someone is going to push this until something breaks, and it better not be you. I'm not proud of how petty a part of me felt when I designed the sting, but I am proud of how clean the execution was. Because if there's one thing a K9 handler with a military intel background knows how to do, it's build a scenario that looks one way to your target and a very different way on camera. I started by giving Victoria exactly what she wanted to see. I shifted more of my training to late evenings, set up extra lighting in the yard, brought out some new equipment that, to an untrained eye peeking over a fence, probably looked like some kind of shady operation. I knew from the camera logs that she'd walk a route past my house at least twice a night, sometimes with a phone raised just high enough to capture video. And I knew, in my bones, that sooner or later she would hop that wall again, this time with better gear and more confidence that she was the hero in her own little legal thriller. When the night came, it was almost anticlimactic. The app on my phone pinged, motion detected in the backyard while I was sitting in the living room reviewing footage with Shadow at my feet. I tapped the feed, and there she was, Victoria, in dark athleisure, gloves, a backpack with what looked like lock tools and more recording devices. She was half crouched along the back wall, clearly believing the shadows covered her, clearly never considering that a guy who spends his life planning for worst cases might have night vision cameras that turn the yard into daylight on my screen. I stepped out onto the patio, gave one low command, and years of training snapped into place. Shadow, torque, and bear fanned out in a perfect containment pattern, hackles up but bodies controlled. Trained not to bite unless I gave a word or someone lunged, just a tight ring of muscle and teeth and disciplined presence that stopped Victoria in her tracks as she dropped her little bag of tools and tried to spin her intrusion into concern. Your dogs are out of control. I climbed in to stop them from harming the neighborhood, she shouted, loud enough for the mics to distort, like volume could drown out the fact that she was standing 3 feet inside my property line with a pair of bolt cutters at her feet. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just pulled my phone from my pocket, hit the shortcut I'd already programmed, and called dispatch. This is Logan Mercer at Cedar Ridge Park. I have an HOA official trespassing in my secured K9 training yard with tools and recording equipment. My dogs have her contained. I need an officer out here before this escalates. Officer Riley Grant showed up 10 minutes later, calm, professional, doing that thing good cops do, where they project enough control to lower the temperature in the room without picking a side. She took one look at Victoria inside the fence, at the bag of gear, at the dogs holding formation on my hand signal, and I saw her expression flicker, just a little. As she put the pieces together, she separated us, took statements on body cam, documented the tools, documented the fact that Victoria had crossed the wall, not the other way around. And in that moment, I thought, foolishly, that the whole thing was finally about to snap back to reality. I underestimated just how far Victoria was willing to go to protect the story in her head. By morning, my quiet little sting had turned into a PR nightmare. Not because of what actually happened, but because of the way she packaged it. She posted photos of a small scrape on her arm from tripping over my hose on the way out, something the footage showed clearly, framed against my fence, with captions about being mauled by aggressive K9s. She went live in a neighborhood Facebook group, sobbing on cue, talking about how she'd risked her safety to investigate illegal dog training and protect families. She launched a page called Safe Street Cedar Ridge, where she painted me as some unhinged ex-military guy running paramilitary drills in suburbia. She filed a formal complaint with my federal contracting officer, alleging that I was misusing working dogs in a residential area and endangering civilians. She appealed to local media, sitting for interviews where she clutched a tissue and talked about living in fear next door to attack dogs. And overnight, my inbox filled with hate. My fence got tagged. Someone left a dead rat in my mailbox. And neighbors I'd waved to for months suddenly refused to meet my eyes because fear spreads faster than facts when someone charismatic is pouring gasoline on it. It would have been easy to lash out, to make a counter video yelling into a camera, to turn the whole thing into an online shouting match. But I've watched enough careers and cases die on the altar of "I'll tell my side on social media" to know that's a losing game, especially when you're up against someone who isn't playing fair. So instead, I did what people like Victoria never believe you'll do. I went backwards into her past to see how many other neighborhoods she protected before mine. That's how I found Oakhaven Village, a sleepy HOA 2 towns over that used to have Victoria as president on their website before her name quietly vanished. I dug deeper, found a vet clinic that had once been on their vendor list, called the number, and a tired voice on the other end introduced herself as Dr. Lauren Pike. Within 5 minutes of explaining who I was and what was happening in Cedar Ridge, her tone shifted from guarded to furious, and she told me how Victoria had destroyed her reputation once for pushing back on a bogus noise complaint about a rescue kennel, fines, rumors, an anonymous ethics report that turned out to be nothing but still cost her clients and 3 years of peace. We met in the back room of a little church one state over because some people were still that scared of her, and it wasn't just Dr. Pike who showed up. There were half a dozen others. A man who'd lost his small engine repair shop after an HOA campaign tanked his reviews, a widow who'd been threatened with foreclosure over a wheelchair ramp. Each story had the same fingerprints, aggressive fines, creative use of bylaws, weaponized complaints, and a community too frightened to stand together. Through Nina Alvarez, a forensic accountant who'd clashed with Victoria over a contractor bid years ago, we got our hands on the kind of numbers people like her pray stay buried. We found over $47,000 in administrative expenses and consulting fees flowing through HOA accounts in ways no one could explain, checks written to shell companies that just happened to trace back to Victoria's sister, to a cousin, to a P.O. box she rented. And when we put these findings in front of Rachel Donnelly, an attorney who specialized in HOA corruption and RICO-style fraud, she just nodded slowly and said, "You're not dealing with a difficult neighbor, Logan. You're dealing with an organized pattern of financial abuse wrapped in covenants and pink stationery." And she's been too smart to hit someone who knew how to push back until now. So we build our case, carefully, quietly, bundling trespass footage with embezzlement spreadsheets, witness statements with social media screenshots, until the story wasn't just HOA president hates dogs. It was HOA president uses fear, fines, and fake narratives to fund her life and crush anyone who says no. The board meeting where everything finally snapped was held in the Cedar Ridge Park Community Center. Same room where they'd voted to fine me into oblivion 2 months earlier. Same beige walls, same folding chairs, but a very different atmosphere because this time every seat was full, people lined up along the back, some clutching printouts of Nina's financial charts, others staring down at their HOA statements like they just realized the numbers could bleed. Victoria opened like she always did, polished, composed, playing the victim card with a steady hand. She stood at the front in a pale blazer, cast her eyes down, then up at the crowd, and launched in her script how she had suffered harassment for simply doing her job, how she'd been attacked by dangerous dogs, how she was being targeted by a coordinated smear campaign led by a militant dog trainer with a grudge. And I watched some heads nod, some eyes narrow, that slippery middle, ground where people just want the drama to stop and will believe whoever gives them the easiest path. When she finished milking the silence, the HOA vice president started to move on to the next agenda item. But Rachel cleared her throat and stood up, calm and deadly in that way only seasoned litigators manage. "With respect," she said, voice carrying to the back wall. "Before this board proceeds, my client Logan Mercer has evidence the membership needs to see, evidence of financial irregularities, abuse of authority, and a pattern of misconduct by President Kane that predates any dispute. About dogs." The room shifted, chairs scraping, people murmuring, and before Victoria could shut it down, my laptop was plugged into the projector, the screen filled with timestamps and clips. There she was on video, climbing my wall at night with bolt cutters. There she was laughing about fine money funding her lifestyle. There were bank records showing HOA funds flowing into Kane Consulting LLC. A business no one in that room had ever heard of, and statement after statement from Oak Haven Village and other communities, faces of people who had no reason to lie, describing the same playbook she'd used here. The real twist, though, came from someone I hadn't expected to stand anywhere near me. Daniel Kane, her husband, sat stiffly in the second row, and when Rachel put up a slide of internal emails detailing plans to target the K9 guy until he folds, she cited a board source. I looked over and saw Daniel staring at the floor, shoulders trembling. Then he raised his hand and said, voice cracking, I gave those to them. I can't watch her do this anymore. The fines, the threats, the way she talks. About you all when you're not in the room. This isn't protecting a community, it's extortion with nicer fonts. Whatever thin ice Victoria had been skating on shattered right then. She lost the polished mask in an instant. Turned on him in front of everyone, spitting blame, accusing him of betrayal, of jealousy, of never understanding what it takes to keep people in line. And for a long minute, the meeting was just this raw, ugly fight. The quiet part of her personality finally said out loud where everyone could hear it. By the time the shouting stopped, the board's attorney had quietly slipped out to make a phone call. 2 uniformed officers walked in, including Officer Grant, this time with a warrant in hand, and the HOA vice president. A man who'd ridden her coattails for years, suddenly found his spine and called an emergency vote to remove Victoria as president. The motion passed in a landslide of raised hands and shaken faces. She was cuffed not for being annoying or controlling or a Karen, but for the boring, serious stuff she'd never believed would catch up with her: embezzlement, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, charges built on the spreadsheets and patterns Nina had dug up, on testimony Rachel had organized, on recordings I'd captured when all I'd wanted at the beginning was to be left alone to throw a ball for my dogs in peace. In the months that followed, Cedar Ridge Park HOA didn't collapse so much as molt, shedding layers of secrecy and fear. Residents elected a new board that opened the books, rewrote covenants, and put real limits on enforcement power. They put in process for mediation before fines, protections against harassment, and sunshine rules that meant no more closed-door vendettas. Property values didn't crash like Victoria had always threatened. If anything, they climbed, because buyers started to hear that this was a neighborhood where the rules were about safety and community, not control and cash flow. Victoria took a plea deal. Her accounts were frozen, her real estate license suspended pending ethics review, her marriage evaporated under the weight of everything she'd built on other people's misery. Daniel filed for divorce. My federal contract survived the storm after an internal investigation cleared me completely. And instead of being quietly blacklisted like she'd hoped, my name started circulating in very different circles as the guy who'd taken on an abusive HOA and won without, letting it turn into a circus. The K9s kept working, of course. Shadow still does his ridiculous happy dance when I pull out the tug toy. Torque still sings its sirens. Bear still leans his whole weight into my side when he senses my shoulders tighten at the memory of those early mornings watching the mailbox. And sometimes the new board brings their kids over to watch demos, to learn how scent tracking works, to see that big working dogs aren't monsters. They're tools and partners, and in my case, the reason I didn't lose my mind. We set up a little informal support network with Dr. Pike, Nina, and some of the other former victims, a loose alliance that shares resources and attorneys and stories with anyone who emails saying, hey, my president is acting like a dictator. What do? We can't fix every abusive HOA in the country, but we can teach people how to stop being picked off one by one, how to document, how to unite, how to remind boards that power is borrowed, not born. So yeah, in the end, the Karen who tried to climb into my yard and dictate what happened on my land wound up in handcuffs. My dog stayed, the community changed, and I got a front row seat to what happens when fear turns into anger, and anger finally turns into action. But I keep coming back to the same question whenever I tell this story, thinking about all the neighborhoods where no one has a camera or a lawyer friend, or the patience to push through, and I wonder this. When someone wraps themselves in rules and property values and uses them to bully and bleed their neighbors, do we get to say, I just want to be left alone, or do we owe it to each other to stand up, to connect the dots, to drag their pattern into the light, even if it means becoming a target first? And if we stay quiet because we're tired or scared or busy, then in the long run, Are we really any different from the person cashing the fines? Or are we just helping them count the money? In silence?